I get it's his mentality. I get he's been doing it for years. But Mike Tomlin riding one workhorse back. Mike Tomlin's philosophy of riding a running back into the ground, it could cost the Steelers this year. It absolutely could, and it's already been evident, okay? I'm Mike Asti, and this is another edition of Mic Drop here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and SteelersNow.com. And even though this is on the heels of a Steelers victory, even though the Steelers got the win, and you can listen to other shows throughout the channel that I've done, especially about this game, the Steelers relying on some luck to get this victory, but a win is a win. There was one part of this game that maybe goes to criticize Mike Tomlin, and I've defended him in the past. I've said many times, and there's other shows on this throughout the channel, throughout SteelersNow.com. You can all find them there. Just search Mic Drop or here through the feed. That many of you don't give Mike Tomlin the credit he deserves in terms of his legacy, in terms of what he's accomplished, in terms of winning seasons, in terms of playoff appearances, in terms of having won a championship, in terms of being a consistent winner and a great coach, maybe not to Belichick by any means, but good for the era for sure, and putting up a similar resume as Bill Cowher. But with all of that said, one thing Mike Tomlin does, and it's not clock management, it's not challenge flags as he's finally won one this year, granted, not the best percentage overall, and that's a whole nother rant, which I've done as well, in terms of the pass interference reviews killing the league and how you have to go after them, but the rule's insane. You can find that there as well throughout the channel. But Mike Tomlin, in the win against Miami, okay, the Steelers eventually, and it was close early, but they eventually found their groove. They got a big enough lead. They had the win secure against the Miami Dolphins. Monday Night Football, it's a late game, so it's not a normal week. It's going to be a short week leading up to the next game here against the Indianapolis Colts, and just keeps on running and run James Conner. And James Conner had maybe the biggest day of his NFL career. Yes, it's Miami, but his yards were there, his yards per catch, or his yards per carry, yards per catch, opened up the passing game as well, got himself into the end zone. James Conner overall, look at the stat line, had maybe his best and most consistent game of his NFL career. Had a game that harkens back to Pitt when he was healthy. And yet got hurt at the end of that game. And one of the underrated notes of that game that I didn't even catch, because we didn't know the severity and what went on with Conner being healthy or hurt until maybe moving into the next week, and then you had the trade deadline and the conversation about whether or not they were interested in Le'Veon Bell. Rumors were they were. Adam Schefter says he kind of corroborates us in local media saying they were, and then Tomlin, after this Colts game, says they never were. Who knows what's true? Who knows whether Tomlin would admit that or not? He probably wouldn't, and it would have made sense to bring him in. But that's a story for another day because it's over and it can't happen this year now. The deadline's over. But like he did with Bell for several years, and kind of led to me defending Bell's point a little bit in terms of it being a business decision, wanting to get his money, wanting to preserve his body and not get banged up in a year that he knew he was going to leave Pittsburgh last season, and knowing he was going to need that money from somewhere else and not wanting to get injured for a team he wasn't going to play for moving forward, and wanting to get his money and look at that, and did, even though not as great of his initial contract with the Steelers offered. But I'll digress on that. But that leads to this. There's a reason to the madness going back to Bell, because Tomlin for years rode Bell into the ground, rode backs into the ground, name a running back, he rode him into the ground prior to that, okay? And wow, it makes sense, and I asked them all last season, is it easier to have a workhorse running back? Is it harder work? And it sounds like a dumb question. Of course, it's easier to have a workhorse running back, but I was leading him in the direction where he now has found himself kind of stuck in this year, in terms of he wants a workhorse running back, and yes, it's easier to have one guy you can point to, but he rides him into the ground too much. Mike Tomlin kept James Conner in that game when it was over. He beefed up his stats, sure, to have the best game of his career, but was that important? James Conner shouldn't have played in that fourth quarter. That game was over. Certainly shouldn't have played late in that fourth quarter. Why is James Conner still toting the rock in the last few minutes of that game? Eventually leaves, but come on. James Conner gets hurt, misses the game against the Colts, and yes, the Steelers won. And you may say, Mike, why are you worrying about this right now? They got the victory. Well, I watched the game, and with Jalen Samuels, who stepped up in spotty starts the last couple of years, had that great game against the Colts, or against the Patriots last year when they got the win in the regular season. But what does he do well? He does it really well, too, as a pass catcher. He's good as a spotty back who gets in there every now and then to mix things up, be a pass catcher. He did that against the Colts, open things up for the passing game, become the check down for Mason Rudolph. He allowed Mason Rudolph to be a little better than against Miami. It still took the offense a while to get going, but he allowed Mason Rudolph to make quicker decisions, which is what he really needs to do and still needs to do moving forward. But when in doubt, go to Jalen Samuels on the check down. And if you have Connor, he might always be in there. So I get it that Jalen Samuels produced that and they still were able to move the football. But it took them another half to get going with an offensive touchdown. They failed to score in that first half against Indy, thanks to the defense and Minkah Fitzpatrick to get them into the end zone. And while the offense eventually moved, and it moved through the air mostly in those checkdowns, Vance McDonald too, helping those short passing routes, the Steelers had to mask not having James Conner. It was a weakness. It was an issue, despite the fact that they won. A game they got lucky in getting the victory, and thanks to an Adam Vinatieri miss of a field goal, got the win. He kicks that field goal. He's the greatest kicker ever. Kicked game winners in Super Bowls. They don't even win the game. They don't even get the win. All that was for naught. Vance McDonald moving those chains as a tight end. Jalen Samuels catching passes on a check down, short passes, and then running further. Mask not having James Conner. And Jalen Samuels struggled mightily to run the football. Okay, north, south, east, west, it didn't matter. He couldn't run the football. He mentioned he was trying to go north. They couldn't go anywhere. Jalen Samuels couldn't get the running game going. Yes, he did something through the air. Yes, the team eventually scored points and eventually moved the chains. But it was evident they didn't have James Conner, who I've criticized in the past for fumbling late in games, costing them there. It's not like I'm saying James Conner is some Hall of Famer. He has his weaknesses. But he had a Pro Bowl style season last year that would have been over 1,000 yards if it wasn't for getting hurt. And he had his best game of his career last week. No, he's not as talented as Le'Veon Bell. Yes, you'd rather have Le'Veon Bell in terms of player to player. And yes, James Conner deserves some criticism when he's laying the football on the ground and they're losing games that way. Go to San Francisco as an example. However, they need somebody to tote the rock. And Mike Tomlin's the reason why that guy's not there right now. Even if it's a by committee, maybe it's a better recipe. Look at the Patriots' recent championship, the Eagles' recent championship, even the Rams going to the Super Bowl last year. Todd Gurley gets hurt. C.J. Anderson takes them throughout the playoffs. It doesn't have to be one key guy. That's why running backs don't get paid tons of money anymore. But it does have to be an overall collective of a team running the football. You need to run to be balanced on offense, to set up the pass overall, to make the defense bite and be aware of what you could do outside of just one dimension of your game and passing. Doesn't matter what Mason Rudolph's doing. His job is harder when you can't run. Yes, you can do the check down, but they need to be able to run the football. And one thing you can point to as a negative from the Colts win, they couldn't run the football. And I'm sure they would have been a better team on the ground with James Conner there. James Conner wasn't there because Mike Tomlin left him in late, because Mike Tomlin has the strategy of riding one workhorse and got James Conner hurt. And he's going to miss several weeks now, and any of those games that are losses, that could greatly affect the team because they can ill afford any of those games to be losses, and they're going to face quality teams as the schedule has some easy games, but does beef up a little bit down the stretch. They need Conner in those games, and Conner's not there, wasn't there against the Colts, because of Mike Tomlin's boneheaded philosophy of riding a workhorse back. It's not to say he's not been a great coach. It's not to say he's not been successful. I'm not calling for the axe or saying he's going to be fired because the Steelers franchise never does that. Maybe he'll walk away in his own after a year. Only got the 1 year extension, not the 2. Maybe the team and him will part ways mutually. Maybe it'll depend on what happens with Big Ben. Who knows? But if he's going to stick around, he maybe needs to modernize himself and kind of adapt to the style of the recent NFL, which is a collective unit of running backs, which is keeping those running backs healthy. Not happening, though, when you get a guy hurt and then you lose that ability to run down the stretch. Make sure you check out the family of networks here, PittsburghSportsNow.com, Pittsburgh Soccer Now, Pittsburgh Hockey Now, SteelersNow.com, and even what we got going on down there in Morgantown, WVSportsNow.com. Stick here. I'm Mike Asti, and this was another edition of Mike Drop here on Pittsburgh Sports Live.